Hi, my Wolfpack Charlie Black 20 back again with another video. But today, what I'm going to be talking about is basically an opinion video, but it's about one of our greatest historical figures, Abraham Lincoln. You see, a lot of people today venerate Lincoln. He's become almost saint-like as somebody who didn't make mistakes, as somebody who was perfect as a president, or at least very, very close to perfect. I'm going to discuss what I think are his political, military, and strategic mistakes that he made as President of the United States. I think his first mistake was when he first came into office, or was elected to office and was waiting to be inaugurated and was inaugurated, was that he believed that the secessionists, the fire eaters of the Deep South and of the 4 other states, that they were bluffing. They didn't really mean secession. They wouldn't destroy the Union over the issue of expanding slavery just because he got elected, when he openly says, I'm not going to destroy slavery where it exists, I'm just going to limit its expansion. He thought they were bluffing to get a better political deal or to stop his inauguration. And he was wrong. They were completely serious. And once Fort Sumter happens and he calls for troops to put down the rebellion, 4 more states join the South, and he has to struggle to keep the border states with him. And it becomes a war. Now, politically, you might say the war was necessary, and morally as well. But politically, you could say it was a mistake on Lincoln not to take them more seriously. And that because of that, it did not avoid the war, it only escalated things. One can make that argument for an alternate theory. Another political mistake was that he thought that most lower-class Southerners were going to be pro-Union. He really underestimated the idea of how angry white Southerners were going to be when their leaders tell them that they're being invaded by a Yankee horde who are going to end slavery and free the slaves and create a race war. That was what Southerners believed to their core. Most of them believed that if given freedom or given weapons, the slaves were going to rise up and massacre them, just like in Haiti in their minds. Obviously, Haiti's a lot more complicated, but that was the story they believed. And also, they really, really did not believe, most of these Southerners, that blacks had any rights. They had a right to live, they had a right to be slaves, that was it. Otherwise, any slave, any black, they could do almost anything they wanted to in their minds, whether that was legal or not. So, Lincoln really underestimated how pro-Union most lower-class Southerners were, especially once the war starts. Another military mistake was him ignoring the Peninsula Campaign and its military value. You see, when McClellan in 1862 did the Peninsula Campaign, it was working. The only thing that stopped McClellan was that Robert E. Lee took over from Joe Johnston. Joe Johnston never met a retreat he didn't like. Robert E. Lee never met an offensive he didn't like. So McClellan is forced back down the peninsula, and Lincoln sees the Peninsula Campaign not only as a failure, but also as McClellan's plan. And because McClellan is so tied to this plan of the peninsula, militarily, it would have worked and could still work, but politically speaking, Lincoln and other Republicans, it was forever covered in McClellan's quote-unquote stench. And so Lincoln never wanted to do the Peninsula Campaign again in that way. Other officers in other areas of the Army recommended doing that, like William Boldy Smith. He was an Army of the Potomac officer. He recommended it to Lincoln, and he promptly found himself shunted off to the west for quite a while. Grant recommended doing it again. in 1864. But when he realized that politically speaking it would not fly with Lincoln, he gave it up. He tried to do it in a way with the Bermuda 100 campaign, which you might call the Peninsula on a budget, but it was just not going to work out in the way that he was thinking, especially because he had a political general in charge of that army to do it. And then another military mistake, you could call it, although politically it made sense, is that he always wanted the Army of the Potomac, Lincoln did, between D.C. and Lee's army. Eventually he would abandon this when Grant went after Petersburg, but for the longest time you needed the commanders of the Union Army had to be between Lee and D.C. at all times. So they couldn't do things like going through the Shenandoah Valley, going back up the peninsula, or coming up through North Carolina. The Army of the Potomac had to be between the capital and Lee's army. Politically, it makes sense. It's a shield. Militarily, it makes no sense because there were hundreds of forts guarding D.C. along with a large garrison that could have held off Lee's army long enough for the Army of the Potomac to do something about it. But militarily, that's exactly what Lincoln wanted, and that confines the Army of the Potomac to an overland campaign over the Manassas, Fredericksburg area, the Wilderness area, until the Petersburg campaign happens. And so that confines the maneuvers of the Army of the Potomac. So commanders like Burnside, Hooker, and even Meade are stuck in that area. And that leads to stalemate, basically. And also, Lincoln demanding that the Army of the Potomac fight Lee's army and defeat them. Don't focus on Richmond, focus on Lee's army. It makes sense politically. You want to destroy the symbol of the Confederacy, which is Lee and his army. The problem is, to do that, you can't do that in that type of warfare. It is way too difficult unless you can, especially with all the political and military restrictions placed on the Army of the Potomac at that time. So to just battle Lee's army, battle it out with him and win, would be very difficult even if Lee has fewer men. Because he can maneuver faster, he has better defensive terrain, he has better knowledge of the terrain, and he's not confined by political considerations of keeping his army between Richmond and the Army of the Potomac. He can maneuver away from there if he needs to, if it will gain him an advantage. He has Jefferson Davis's full trust. The Army of the Potomac commanders, until Grant, did not. So that was a military mistake. And that really showed that Lincoln was not a military man. He learned and had some good moments as a military commander-in-chief, but that's not where his strength lies, most definitely. Which is why he needed men who could advise him in that way, which he didn't really have too many of, and he didn't really let go of the reins until Grant came along. Another political mistake, probably his last greatest political mistake, was picking Andrew Johnson as his VP in 1864. Andrew Johnson, not a fool, good politician on Tennessee politics, stayed loyal to the Union when no other Southern senator did, but his political skills were not meant for the national level as vice president or president. We see that. Part of it is because he takes Lincoln's plans for Reconstruction being a soft Reconstruction, bring the South back in as quickly as possible, but he does it at the expense of the free people of color that had come into the United States after slavery has ended. He throws them completely under the bus. He will not meet with black leaders like Frederick Douglass, who Lincoln met with multiple times. Andrew Johnson was a racist through and through, even if he had a white common man's touch, like his daughter doing the laundry while they're in the White House. And he would bring in the Southerners who had just been fighting a war, the political leaders, the military leaders. He would bring them back in as quickly as possible. And these men would be in Congress. They would be in the Senate. They would be in the House. And they were men who had just fought to destroy the Union. And the radical Republicans said, no way. We will oppose that as much as we can. And this led to political infighting with the Republicans and Andrew Johnson. And it led to Andrew Johnson facing impeachment and getting off by only one vote, which he shouldn't have been convicted. He should not have been convicted. I believe that. I just don't think he was the right man to be president at that moment with the plan he had and the personal problems he had. He was a drunk, a complete racist, and more than willing to throw the Republicans under the bus if it meant fulfilling Lincoln's plan of a soft Reconstruction. Which I think a soft Reconstruction in the South was a mistake. As shown by Andrew Johnson, it leads to a backlash by the radical Republicans. If Lincoln had done it, I think he could have maneuvered himself around these things. He was politically very adept. Andrew Johnson, he was not the man for that job. And there were others that Lincoln could have picked. He actually asked William Rosecrans, a Union general who was a war Democrat and mostly successful, to be his VP, and I think Rosecrans declined in the end, which I wish he hadn't. He would have been very good at it. As president, I think he would have been very good, at least in terms of dealing with the South, because Rosecrans may not have been excited about emancipation, but he didn't try to oppose it. He didn't try to say anything against it. He just said, hey, I'm following the rules of the president, of the commander-in-chief. Lincoln's final mistake, on a personal level, but also a political and military, as commander-in-chief, as president of the United States, is he didn't take his personal security seriously enough, especially when the war is ending, which leads to his assassination. I believe if he had taken it more seriously, he would still be alive today. Or at least there was a very good chance he would still have been alive to go through his second term as president. As it was, John Wilkes Booth got him. So that is what I think were the political, military, and strategic mistakes of Abraham Lincoln. Now, again, this is very few mistakes on his part. And again, Lincoln is not a military man. He would commonly say this. But, politically speaking, the man was a legal and political, I want to say genius. I think, more accurately, he was great at it. Not quite a genius, but great at it, because he had his own style that people came to accept and use, at least in the North. The South was never going to listen to him, never. But he was able to use it in the Union to great effect, especially among the Republicans, using a moderate, gradual movement to keep the coalition of the Union together, politically speaking, as well as knowing the right political moments to strike at the South, as well as to hold back. So, that's my video on Abraham Lincoln's mistakes. So, take care, my wolf pack. Catch you next time.